The illustrious Jabba bids you welcome. I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine. Hey, Church Planter, this is Pete Mitchell.
And it's Peyton Jones.
And Peyton has a petrol hedge trimmer going on behind him.
This is what happens when I spend time with Ben Bisco, my intern, which, hey, I haven't even listened to that podcast. I don't even know what he said about me.
Dude, he said working for Peyton is like a mistake that he'll never make again.
Yes, and he says, and if God loves me, he would never ask me to.
And so here's what happened. Peyton jumps on the line this morning and he goes, "Can you hear the noise around me? I mean, it sounds like I got a leaf blower going on. I got a petrol hedge trimmer." I'm like, a petrol hedge trimmer? What's a petrol hedge trimmer?
It's so funny, dude, because I was with 4 dudes yesterday, and Ben was one of them, and I dropped some term later on the phone with Bo Moffitt, and he started laughing. He's like, "What was that?" And I'm like, "Dude, I've been hanging out with Ben. It's all coming back, man." Because Ben's from Oxford, for those of you that don't know. So when I get around him, all the vocabulary changes. You know, you live over in Britain, you got to say things like, you don't say your oven, you say your cooker. You know,
Well, what's funny too is when you're really trying to connect with someone from over there, you don't use full sentences either. You just kind of assume they understand where that sentence is going, and you just kind of drop it right in the middle.
Right? Exactly.
I'm just saying.
But anyways, so here I am, and it's like a conspiracy theory. Pete and I say, hey. You know, Pete's like, "Hey, my family's coming in town. Can we move it earlier?" Of course, I'm away next week camping. So Pete says, you know, "Hey, you want to get a jump on it?" So I go, "Yeah, let's do it Friday morning." I got to do it early. So when do we pick? The one time that the guy's going to be out with the leaf blower. I'm telling you.
Every time a leaf blower sounds, a Church Planter podcast is being recorded. We've decided that, like 2 or 3 episodes back.
We've also decided that leaf blowers are in league with Lucifer. It has to be. You know, it's like, it has to be. It's a conspiracy. I'm telling you.
So what's new with you, man? in the last 2 days since we last recorded our afternoon podcast.
So, okay, so on the call the other day, I talked about my Lego Voltron. However, I did not tell you about my Battle Cat Cringer ring.
So what else is going on in your life?
I'm just saying, they had everything. It was like an 80s explosion of jewelry. And I was like, I should have come out like Mr. T. I pity the fool. Or as the meme you sent me the other day with Mr. T with pool cleaning equipment, I pity the pool.
That was the funniest meme ever. I pity the pool.
I pity the pool. So, you know, but I always picture when like we say stuff like that, there's a church planter somewhere out there drinking milk and it's just totally shooting out his nose.
Well, you know, you got to think about this. Like, the older you and I get, the less we have in common with this next generation.
Right? But Stranger Things is keeping us more relevant than we think we are.
I don't know. I still haven't been able to go back to finish season 2, so I could even go back to season 3.
Season 2 was so disappointing, but season 3 is worth getting through. You could actually almost skip season 2.
Yeah, but I literally forgot what happened, so I had to go back and watch season 1. I struggled through that. I got like 2 episodes into season 2, and then I'm like, maybe I'll do Breaking Bad again.
It's so funny, dude. I know we're in a TV show lull. We can't figure out for the life of us what to watch right now. But you know, it's funny because
it's a good one. Yellowstone. I think you might have to pay for
I heard that was dynamite.
Yeah,
I heard
it's
that was
really
like the
good.
best show on TV.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
So I was going to say though,
It's Melrose Place for cowboys. That's Yellowstone.
oh, it's like Dallas.
I told Jamie, I go, we're watching Dallas. You realize that? Like, I never
Yeah.
thought I'd be watching Dallas. We're watching Dallas.
Yeah, like 40 years later, you're watching Dallas.
Yeah.
That's the crazy thing about that. So JR was shot like what, like 36, 37 years ago? No, you guys have no idea what we're talking about. But I think
But I still don't know who shot JR.
Stranger Things, I believe, I believe they even had like that whole Who Shot JR on one episode. Because that was like a thing, dude. That was as big as Josh Harris announcing too soon. So that was that. That was actually
I was like, Josh, you mean from Deadliest Catch? That Josh Harris?
That's so funny, dude. I actually think Josh Harris, which is going to be our topic today, we want to talk a little bit about that whole phenomenon with respect. Let me say that. We're not going to jump on anybody's bandwagon, but we do want to talk about the elephant in the room, and but with respect to Josh, not disrespecting this poor guy, and because I got some thoughts. I got thoughts, Fada, but we're going to talk through that. So, but I did want to say, Elle from Stranger Things, the girl that plays her, I watched the funniest clip where she was at Comic-Con with the guy that plays the sheriff, and she was saying, someone asked her a question. She's like, you have no idea how many things during this show I did not understand in the script. And I was like, what is that? She was like, they had to give me a crash course in the 80s. She's like, what's a walkie-talkie?
Oh,
you know,
my gosh.
like all these things she had no idea what things were. And because the kids use walkie-talkies, and I remember growing up, and that's just something you would have, you know, and
they would go about 10 feet.
Right. There's no way you're like the other side of the city going, hey guys, you know, we're over here.
And it was all static all the time. Like they didn't
Right.
have those ones that are silent and only you hear the person. Yeah, it was nothing like that.
I remember having Star Trek walkie-talkies, man. Deet, 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 deet. You could do the Morse code on it. And,
They could all do Morse code, even though all of us would be like looking at that stupid little cheat sheet. A.
Yes.
Beep, 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 beep. And like,
And you're on the other side going, I have no idea what he's typing.
you just start beeping back at the other person. Yeah, I'll beep you too. Beep, beep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or if someone's hiding in bushes with the walkie-talkie, you hit that to like blow their cover. Because we used to, I know this sounds weird today. Like we survived the 70s and 80s, but we used to like steal our brother's BB guns and pellet guns and run around the neighborhood in camo, hide in bushes and shoot each other. Like it's amazing we all have eyes.
You'd be shot today by a cop if you did that. Like,
Right.
Seriously, you'd just be shot today if you did that.
I'm not even exaggerating. We had ninja climbing claws. We had grappling hooks. We lived in an apartment. We would go up to like apartment number 4, go up the stairs, hop over the balcony, run around on roofs, hop from one roof to the other. We've got guns. We're running on people's roofs. We're climbing people's chimneys with grappling hooks. Dude, it was a good time to be a kid. That's all I can tell you. You know, I remember getting in trouble because sometimes we'd shoot other kids in the neighborhood who didn't have guns. And then their dad would come over to your house and be like, hey, you shot my kid, you know, where's your dad? Where's your mom? You know, and
You remember that was back when you would tell your kids, come in when the street lights turn on. Like that was how they called you. It wasn't like they, call your cell phone or whatever. It was just, hey, when the street lights come on, it's time to come back home.
yeah. And your mom would stand at the door like Charlie Bucket's mom and sing solos, you know,
I don't know who Charlie Bucket is, but sounds great.
Willy Wonka. Remember
Yeah.
that when he's going down the cobblestone road?
That was just a freaky movie, man. Oh, the first that did not work for me at all. Not at all.
It is kind of weird, you know, and if you ever read the book, it's as twisted as the remake. That's what Tim Burton based it on. It's twisted. Roald Dahl was a twisted dude, like in a good way though. He was kind of like the writer who he wrote all the things like eating your boogers and picking them, you know, or picking your boogers and eating them. I guess he do it in reverse order, but he He wrote all that kind of stuff, and he got away with it.
I think this is proof that morning podcast not necessarily better than afternoon podcast.
I think you're right. We were killing ourselves on the last afternoon podcast.
Yeah, and it always comes back to, are we having a good time? If the listeners having a good time, good for them. But are we having a good time?
But I have to say something about my ring, and it's a 2-in-1 ring, Pete. The outer shell, because there's 2 rings, and they make one together, almost like the mighty robot Voltron. But it's Cringer and Battle Cat. And you know what's rad to me is, like, I don't wear things unless they have significance. And I've had to stop wearing this ring because it has a spike that keeps stabbing my children. It took Eden's scab off the other day when I was just briskly walking past her. And he's got that spike that comes out of his helmet, and it's on my ring. And so I took her scab off. I felt really bad, so I stopped wearing it. There's a 2-in-1 ring where it's Cringer on one ring, and then you put the other ring over top of it, and it makes his battle armor. And for me, the meaning is I'm equal parts Cringer and Battle Cat. It just kind of like Paul, where at the end of every verse or every epistle, he's like, hey, and pray for me for boldness. Because like, Paul, you don't need that. Like, you're super bold. And he's like, no, I'm not really. Pray for me, because that boldness comes from the Holy Spirit. And that's when I need to do what I do. So I love that ring, but I just can't wear it because it hurts my kids.
Well, that's a good reason to not wear it then. I'm kind of glad that you acknowledge that and then act accordingly.
It sits in this cool little like gentleman's box I have in my my bureau, as we would say in Britain, since we're on British words today, British vocabulary words. And it sits in there, and now it just grins at me like, dude, you could rock this.
Yeah.
So don't call CPS on me. That's all I'm saying.
Well, no promises.
So, hey, should we get into our topic today? Because this is a big topic.
If you think it's a big topic, I think it's going to take like 5-10 minutes. I think this is going to be a short podcast.
I think you want it, dude. You're like, hey, pancakes are calling. The family's here. Come on, IHOP.
No, dude. I do. Right now, I'm trying to do the intermittent fasting.
Yeah, dude.
I'm doing that as well, man.
So before we get out of smack and into the topic, so like, what's on the menu today? Because I actually really love this topic.
I'm actually not 100% sure, because I'm not sure if I'm going to do a free day today or if I'm going to save my free day for tomorrow, because I'm trying to do a 24 to 36 hour fast after my free day. And so I'm not sure, do I want to fast tomorrow or do I want to fast Sunday? And I can tell you guys that because I'm not doing it for spiritual reasons, which is not to say I can't utilize it for that, but doing it more for health reasons.
Doing it for health reasons, yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what's funny, dude? Because when you do it, you do gain a mental and spiritual. So you and I were talking
dude, you totally, it's so crazy how much clarity you gain when you do a fast. And I'm like, no wonder God said, hey, you really want to connect with me? Prayer and fasting.
Right.
And I'm like, I get it now. I get it.
Absolutely. It's funny because at the beginning of every year, I used to do a 3-day fast. And
see, that's amazing to me, because I like in the last 2 weeks, I've done 2 24-hour fasts. One of them went 28. I was trying to do 36 and just couldn't do it, man. I just, and then I realized it's a mental game. So I would love to hear how you do 3 days. Like, is it just you go into it going, I'm doing this? And because basically by day 2 is when day 2 is the worst. I mean, it just.
Well, so I would do juice. It would be juice fast. So there would be some caloric
electrolyte,
intake.
sure. I get it.
Yeah. And so I would do that. But by past the 36-hour mark, you're good then. There's
See, I think it depends on the person, because what I've heard from most people is they go, the second day is the hardest. And then once you make it through the second day, like basically, 42 to 48 hours, then you're golden. You can go pretty much
on
as long
your
as
last
you want.
day, like this. I remember every year feeling like this. By the last day, I remember thinking, I'm sad to leave this, because I'm actually, you feel like you crossed a threshold and you're sad it's over. Like, I was disappointed to eat food every time. But I was like, well, I'm only doing a 3-day food or 3-day fast, like you're kind of disappointed. Like, do I have to, like, I don't really want to stop, like, because as you said, you hit a certain stride. And I used to, so a lot of you guys don't know this. Those of you that, some of you guys would know a book called Rees Howells Intercessor that is kind of like a stalwart of prayer. Guy was a total prayer warrior, and amazing things happen. But of course, we're talking about Wales, land of revivals. And so I used to teach at the school that he founded. And that was where I was teaching like Old Testament and stuff. And what was amazing was, so someone's calling me. What was amazing was, now I have my Apple Watch. Yeah,
Peyton.
no.
Peyton. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it was that dude. He was like, you talking about me? I had a strange sensation to call you. No, but like they were highly prophetic. And I remember being at that school, and the guy who was the president of the seminary, he was fasting all the time. Now, dude was skinny as a rail, but he was a massive prayer warrior, and he would just spend long times in prayer. It was really inspiring, and he was really neat. Like, he was one of those guys you meet and you're like, you're a pretty cool dude, like he was single. Like, he had set himself aside in his life. Like yeah. I'm just set aside for the Lord. That's all I want to do. I want to pray. I want to seek the kingdom. I want to raise up this next generation of leaders. And it was pretty special, man. You don't often meet guys like that, but he was kind of like that guy Simeon in the New Testament, So, but
you know what the longest fast on record is?
Huh?
382 days.
I was gonna say I would have thought it was like 100.
Yeah, no, it was 382. The guy started out at like 400, 410, something like that.
Wow.
And he ended up at 180. And all he did was, it was all under a doctor's care. Like, guys, don't do a 382-day fast. For most of our church planners, that'd be called starvation. Not the same thing, but
I remember being on that. Care. Yeah, I remember being on the missionary diet. There was a lot of starvation going on when I first hit the mission field.
Like, starvation is different than fasting. Fasting is done by choice. You have food available to you. You're choosing not to do it.
For like a year straight, almost probably a year and a half, Andrew and I, we had like 4 grocery items. We had beans, potatoes, eggs, and bread. Now, that was not a help. It was just, that was the stuff that was really cheap that would fill you. And that's what we ate. And literally, I don't even, I know you guys probably don't believe this, but that's pretty much all we ate. We would have little treats, like once a week we'd have something else. There was a 2-for-1 for 5 pounds at this pub called Weatherspoons. And we would go there, and that was the fighting pub. That was the pub that was like, kind of like, it would be like the equivalent of a Denny's. And it was a chain of them. They had really cheap, you never asked what was in this hamburger or what was this made out of, but you would go in there and you get a 2-for-5, and you could get a pint with it. So we usually get shandy because I wasn't a big drinker. And, but man, I'm telling you, that was like our treat once a week. And I mentioned this on my other podcast, Ministry Ninja. See what I did there? And, I mentioned this to Barry Witherspoons, and he just goes, "Oh, Witherspoons, no." But that was heaven to us, man. But I came back off the mission field, and people were like, like the first year, people were like, "Oh my gosh, what'd you do?" Like, "You look so good." And it was Orange County, and I was like, I just don't eat. And they're like, no, really, what do you do? And I'm like, no, I don't eat.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I get it. And it's actually, I know you say it in jest, but it's sad to me because we have money. Like, Orange County has money.
Right.
And yet we let our missionaries go hungry.
Right.
Like, there's a difference between fasting and starvation. Like I was saying, there's a difference.
Well, I gotta tell you, I'm glad because, like, for me, it's amazing to me. Like the more I go on and the more I'm reading the scripture, like when Paul goes, I know what it is to be hungry. I know what it is to be in want. Like, thank God I've never been naked. I mean, I would love to have naked Sundays. I mean, I'm just teasing. Please,
I actually shower with my clothes on, so I'm never naked.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's shameful. But, but it's funny because, like the more I go on, I'm like, that was a good experience. That was good for me. I mean, when Paul says, I know that's like a badge of honor for him, where he's like, look, I did this for the gospel. And I think to a certain degree, like I opened Reaching the Unreached, cha-ching, where I'm like, hey, man, I bear on my body the marks of Jesus, like I've got a scar over my left eye, taking a beat down, and he didn't beat me up because I was sharing the gospel with him, but my approach to him was on behalf of the gospel, the way I handled it. So,
yeah,
on my way into church one Sunday morning.
I think we'll probably do a health summit for pastors.
That's
like
not
we're talking
a
about
bad
with
idea.
like we're talking about with our Bivo one. Just from the people that I've been talking to, I'm like, man, you know what? I'd love to bring this to our pastors that we work with.
I know some people that would come running for that. Like if they could contribute to it, So we'll talk about that later, but that's not a bad little idea because I don't know if you and I talked. I think we mentioned on our other podcast that Wesley was like, hey, this is huge. Health is
yeah. He has
huge.
IBS. Don't you remember?
That's so funny. So, hey, let's get into our topic. Let's talk. I want to talk a little bit about.
Wait, hold on. Great Scott! It's time for this week's topic. Let's get down to the nitty gritty.
Oh, that's so good. Oh, I wonder if we played that every week if people would know. So real quick, just an aside, useless repository of useless information. I did not say suppository. I said repository. But Eric Stoltz. That he was originally cast as Marty McFly, right? And he was fired partway through the filming. Like they had done like half the movie, and they had to refilm all those shots. I watched an interview with Biff Tannen and Doc Brown and Christopher Lloyd, and they both thought they were going to get fired the whole time because when you fire your lead guy, it's kind of sounds like a little aside there. So you could have been the next Doc Brown. I'm just saying.
Oh, I was like, where is this going? At first I was like, okay, he's going, no, what? Where did we just turn on this? I don't know where we're going. I was thrown off.
I've only had 2 cups of coffee. I got a little bit of fuzzy head going on. So we'll see what happens here. So, hey, real quick, just a little background. Unless you've been living under a rock, you would know that recently we had Josh Harris, and I want to preface this by saying we're not going to attack him at all. I really have no desire to attack. I've read things on the internet because, obviously all of you know that Josh Harris, shared that he had left the faith. And of course, the internet was quiet about it and kind and, offered a helping hand as usual. Brother, if you need to talk, we're here. But what happened was Josh Harris first, and if you don't know who that is, he about 20-something years ago, 22 years ago, he wrote a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye. He came from the homeschool movement, was kind of a hero in homeschooling. His book, because of that, really took like wildfire, and he started kind of like the courtship. You don't date, you court. Biblical courting. It's since been called the purity movement, although I don't know if I agree with that. The purity movement was bigger. It also started earlier. Not to say that he wasn't a voice in it, but I'm watching articles say he started it. Elizabeth Elliot actually, with Passion and Purity, was probably the first advocate of not dating, not kissing, barely holding hands, that kind of thing. And
oops, I lost. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, I read Passion Purity. I do think to a certain degree, it jacked me up, took away some of the magic of romance that should be there. But at the same time, I made it to the altar a virgin, and so did my wife. And so who's to say that it was good, bad, or ugly? We kind of joke around and say, gosh, we were dealing with enough temptation. It wasn't like we were temptation free or didn't maybe, have some hot, steamy makeout sessions. There were, but it was kind of like we were really trying to honor God in our dating relationship. And I was in the ministry. I remember one night, I stayed out talking all night with Andrea. And somebody was like, hey man, I saw, your car and her car in the same spot. And I said, did you see us sitting on the curb talking? Because that's where we were all night. And they're like, no, I didn't see that. And I go, you're probably too busy looking at our cars and looking in the windows to see if you could catch. But I was like, we were sitting out on the curb all night just talking. And, and at that time, the person was like, hey man, you gotta be above reproach. And they were a friend. They were trying to help me out. I get it. They weren't trying to be a jerk. Not everybody who rebukes you, by the way, is a jerk. Sometimes you need that. And they were trying to be cool. But, I would say looking back, I never read Josh Harris's stuff. Never got really deeply embedded in anything he did. Have never literally read a thing. I don't think I've ever heard a sermon. So I really don't know him. I'm not familiar with him. So I can't pretend to know what's going on, but I have a few guesses, but we'll see how far we get here. But needless to say, he first announced that he would be splitting up with his wife on Twitter. The tweet came out. It said, please respect our privacy. This is not an easy decision, but we feel it's the right one. And of course, when you read that, when somebody says respect our privacy, there's something painful underneath that they don't want to talk about. And so I was kind of like, all right.
Well, even if they don't say it, you go through a divorce, I don't care how much you hate the other person. It's painful. Like,
oh gosh. Yeah.
Don't ever try and convince me that somehow, this was mutual. There's pain.
Pete's had
pain.
5, and I've had at least 6, 7 divorces.
You and I have almost divorced like 3 or 4 times on this podcast.
That's true. But, Oklahoma. But, the
people have no idea what that means. That's our safe word.
So
the fact that we have a safe word is hilarious.
So, it's funny because, Pete and I both on our first marriage, but I get it. Like 22 years, man.
I almost spit out my coffee. We're on our first, as if we've got, a planned 2 or 3 marriages on the line.
Yeah. Well, knock out at least a couple more. But, I don't know if you ever have that conversation with Jamie, like, hey, if you died,
Oh, I always tell her I'm on the hunt for the next ex-Mrs. Mitchell.
Behave yourself, Mitchell.
Sorry. Isn't that a Jurassic Park line? Isn't that what Jeff Goldblum?
Rad.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. So, it's funny because, as you look at that, just the fact that his marriage split up, I would have thought people, I guess the irony for people is that it was I kissed dating goodbye. But again, seriously though, marriage is hard. Have some compassion. We don't know what these two have gone through. This guy's in a glass bowl. Celebrityism and leadership do not go well together. It is a recipe for disaster. And I think very few people can handle it. Whitfield said it almost destroyed him. Spurgeon said the same. Wesley didn't give a rip what anyone thought, so he was okay. But, most people don't handle that well. And this poor kid, man, from the time he was extremely young, he became a national spokesman and celebrity. Before he really had the equipment and maturity to deal with it, this guy was in the limelight. And for me, when I first heard that, I just thought, I remember that guy being so young. And people back then were going, dude, he hasn't even gotten through puberty yet. Why should I listen to him about love, life, and marriage, And that was kind of a bit of a backlash that happened back then. So for me, I felt like, that's, to me, originally when I heard, I just thought, I'm not surprised, that's tough. But I wasn't mad at him, It was kind of like, I guess people just feel, oh, the irony, you know, they're mad because maybe they read his books or they listened to it. And so then they're upset. But here's a guy who wanted to help others. And so he gave a huge chunk of his life to helping others, trying to do the right thing. He since apologized for his writings, which I find, I get it on one hand, because your opinions change as you go and your understanding changes. So I get that. There's things I've written before, wondered, is that right? You know, should I amend that? But yeah, man, I mean, it's just, it's hard. It's hard to watch that. And my heart goes out to him. That's the first part of the story.
Well, let me just throw a couple of tidbits in here. You just really reminded me of our first 16 episodes of the podcast when we quoted Michael Cheshire on like every episode.
Michael Cheshire. Oh, I forgot we used to do that.
His book, Why We Eat Our Own, I think really hits on a lot of the stuff that we're talking about right here, because he goes into the Ted Haggard deal. And I think, if I remember correctly, you know, Michael's telling the story. He was having lunch with a friend who was a non-Christian, and like there was a TV playing in whatever, you know, little eatery they were at, you know, like a sandwich shop type thing. And the Ted Haggerty thing was on the TV, and he's like, yeah, what's something along the lines of, what's wrong with you Christians? You eat your own. Like there's no forgiveness. There's no grace. Right. There's no mercy. There's no, this person's going through a bad time. Let's circle the wagons around them. You know, let's be a shield from everything and walk them through this, because God hasn't abandoned them. Why are we abandoning them?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think that's kind of what, I read a Facebook post by Alex Early, and it was a bit of a slap in the face, but perhaps a good one. He said, he goes, hey, Jesus loves Josh Harris, even if you don't.
Oh, geez, that's awesome.
Yeah. And I just thought, you know, that's right. And it was kind of prophetic, you know, that step back and think about where Jesus is with Josh. Jesus loves Josh. That's never changed, right? Would Jesus be pained by this? Yes, but God's big. He's got a thick skin. There's nothing to say that I couldn't get in a place and you couldn't get in a place where we're so devastated and hurt by something that I don't even know if there is a God. I mean, I've been mad at God. I've been furious with him at times. I've never gotten to the point where I think, well, you're just a fantasy. I made you up. I've never gotten there yet. But that's not to say that I couldn't. Now, I'll tell this to somebody who's close to me who's an atheist. And they're like, no, I don't accept that, because faith is what faith is. Like, you can't have faith and then think that. And that's his take on it. But for me, the way that we're wired as human beings, so much of what we think is logical actually is emotional.
Oh, yeah.
And they've done studies on it.
And I've noticed that you were really emotional too. So,
hey, I will not deny I am a sensitive dude, you know. But
Oklahoma.
I am emotional. But, you know, it's funny because, and Lloyd Jones said that once. He said, you know, God calls sensitive men to the ministry. And then he added, he has to. And you know, you look at guys like Elijah, David, these were very sensitive men, yada, yada, Peter. But, you know, and even Paul, I mean, you see Paul in the full kaleidoscope of emotions, you know, rage, anger, sadness, heartbreak, joy. You see all these things reflected in his writings. Paul was a heart on your sleeve kind of guy. And so, you know, when you're looking at this, they've done studies that show that when you get brain damage and it affects the part that deals with emotion in your brain, that they can't make decisions anymore, right? Like, because so much of what you decide, like what are you going to eat, is what you're feeling, right? Like just choosing a restaurant. They can't choose a restaurant, simple things like that. And there's a book that there's a lot of books. Unfortunately, the one that I read had a little bit of a racy title, and it was F asterisk asterisk asterisk, so 4-letter word, but it doesn't print the word, but it was, the F, like you're supposed to imagine, F your feelings. And it has all this data. It was not a very well written book. I don't recommend it, but he has all the data in there and the studies, and just wasn't very well put together. I always find that when someone has to put a cuss word in their title, they're going for the cheap win. I know this will sell books, but it wasn't very well written, to be honest. I read a lot of books on neuroscience, and that was.
Do you really?
I do. It's one of my favorite subjects.
No kidding. I'm actually kind of fascinated by that.
Well, so in the last few years, working with NAM, we took on a trainer named Charles Stone, and he's a pastor. He has, he's written like 3-4 books on neuroscience. And
Jeez.
Gosh darn it!
He hated you today. Oh my gosh.
Train. Should see me shaking my fist.
Dude, that guy hated you today. Oh, what did he wait until he was literally by your window to lay on that horn?
I'm outside. That's the problem. And I think it was that time I threw a hammer at the cab when he came by.
Wait. Here you go.
Calm down, diddly 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 diddly. They did their best, shoddily iddly iddly diddly. Gotta be nice, hostility diddly biddly diddly. Ah, hell, diddly ding dong crap!
Exactly. Flanders completely summarized my feelings.
Flanders understands me.
So so going back to that, one of the things that I think that we need to realize. So then a few days, part 2, a few days later, Josh came out and said, and he's by a serene river. It's really pretty. I mean, there's like a crystal lake and beautiful mountains, snow-capped peaks, and he tweets, "I'm in a really good place right now." Which, if you've ever understood divorce, it's as traumatic as a death. That's what psychologists tell you, that it's that traumatic. So I'm thinking this is kind of like that post-stress euphoria. He's gotten over a hump, and there's a momentary, but the depression will set in, trust me. Especially when I've got a minor in psychology. I'm just telling you guys that there's going to be a crash. But he says, I'm in a really good place. I'm doing well, and I don't wish that on him. It actually really saddens me, but I just know what's gonna come. And he says, I'm in a really good place, and and then that's where he says, I don't think I'm a Christian anymore, and I apologize for how I've treated the LGBT community, which I actually think that's positive. That's always okay. And I don't know how he's treated them, so I don't take issue with that. I think the church needs to look at that for sure, and how we've treated them. Perhaps not the doctrine, but perhaps our treatment. But then going on from
there's no doubt the treatment, because I remember the 80s and 90s well, when the general philosophy was, see, that's why y'all are getting AIDS.
That's right.
That was the mentality. No grace, none of that. Just you're reaping what you sow. Like, bring out every Bible verse that says it's going to come around and get you. That was.
Well, and those of you that have read Reaching the Unreached, I deal with this in a whole chapter. Cha-ching. And just talk about, like that whole topic. And because that's very much something that we dealt with in Refuge Long Beach. It's written from a more of a practitioner standpoint that, hey, like, you can talk about people, but these are people that I would consider my friends, and, people that I've ministered to and come into situations and help them pick up the pieces. And, so, and I have a huge amount of compassion towards people from that, cross section of society, and feel that that's where we ought to be, and so all that to say, but when he shared that, there was a huge backlash. And I mean, even as far as this morning, I woke up this morning, picked my phone up, immediately something popped up on Facebook about it, and somebody was, there's always sin behind it, and and listen, I might have my thoughts, but maybe I don't post things about a dude I don't know. Maybe I don't go on there and start affirming what has happened in his life. I don't understand half of what happens in my own life. That's why I go to counseling. On a regular on a monthly basis. Andrew and I will sit down, and we'll have someone else go, "Hey, we don't figure this out. Can you help us figure it out?" And so for me to stand from afar, not knowing, like, there's so many different outcomes. He could be suffering mental illness. He could be. He himself could be gay and he's coming out of the closet. And that all these things that he said are connected. Maybe not. Like, we have no idea.
It could be too that he is just deeply hurt. Maybe his spouse did something. I mean,
correct.
We literally have no idea.
Correct. And in history, we had Lonnie Frisbee, who is still one of my heroes. And I know some people will be like, how in the world can you have Spurgeon as a hero and Lloyd Jones and then Lonnie Frisbee as a hero? Well, keep in mind, I'm Franken preacher. Like, I'm a little bit of everybody. So it's like you've got, I'm a little charismatic and I'm a little this and a little that. But the thing is that Lonnie Frisbee came to faith, and he was the evangelist he later developed into a more apostolic figure, and you can see that early on, but he was the guy that preceded Greg Laurie at Calvary Chapel. In fact, he handed his church over to, or his small group, that it was like something like 800 people by the time he handed over to Greg Laurie, which was technically a church. But he was the guy bringing everyone to faith. He started those Monday nights way back in the day, and Greg Laurie slotted in when he was done. But he went there, he built Calvary, he built Vineyard, and then he went on in the 80s to build the discipleship movement, which really centered in Florida. The funny thing is, this dude was so anointed and so gifted at reaching lost people that he had built 3 massive movements, right? That's how apostolic he was. But in his third movement, which was the discipleship movement, the head pastor slept with his wife, right? Because Lonnie Frisbee, ironically, never was the central figure. He was always kind of in an APES model, functioning evangelistically and slightly apostolically, but he was never the lead guy. But he was the guy that God was using to build these movements, really, around other people. And when he before he came to faith, he was a homosexual. And the story of his conversion is that he was naked up in the mountains with a bunch of people tripping on acid and said, "I'm Jesus." And then, all of a sudden God spoke to him. And because he opened up the Bible and he read the Bible and he was like, oh. And God convicted him. He came back down from the mountains and was like, I need to keep reading this book. Became saved, started the Jesus movement in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. Like, that was Lonnie Frisbee. Then came down to Newport Beach and was the catalyst for Calvary Chapel. So a lot of people don't realize that this was this dude, but when his wife cheated on, and I'm not suggesting at all this is Josh Harris's story. What I'm saying is we just don't know enough to really comment on it. And so when Lonnie Frisbee's wife cheated on him, he went into such a tailspin that he went back into the homosexual lifestyle. And, that's heartbreaking to me. It's literally heartbreaking to me that was like a trigger, and he just backslid. Like, he just gave up, because in each of these movements, he was kind of stabbed in the back and dismissed and passed over. And he was more dangerous, I guess, so leaders passed him over. But going back to this, I just don't really feel like I can speak to Josh Harris's situation. I don't know what's causing this, and I don't think anyone else does. And I think the church needs to sometimes just shut up and just say, hey, Josh, it's really hard, man. Like, I'm sorry, are you okay? You know, like what we do psychologically is like when a dog is sick or diseased, the other dogs turn on it, because the way that animals stop the spread of disease in the diseased animals, they kill it. And then that stops the spread. It kills the host and kills the organism. And on a just purely instinct level and survival level, it's the only thing animals can do. And so that's built into their instincts. But we do kind of much the same. Like you said, we eat our own. It's exactly where that term comes from. We eat our own. We literally attack the sick ones. And, you know, I would love that Josh Henry gets through this time.
Tell that owl to shut up.
That's a dove.
Oh, shoot the dove.
I can't speak to a dove that way on a Christian podcast, Pete.
Cuckoo, cuckoo.
Hey, I'm just saying, you know, the dove is a significant figure. We may be more blessed on this podcast than Norm. I'm just saying. But, you know, I guess what was I saying?
Well, I'm going to chime in because I'm going to take that as a break. So, you know, I was thinking about this topic because you mentioned via text that this is what we were going to talk about.
Which is rare.
Very rare. Very rare that we have any idea what we're going to talk about, even more than 5 minutes before we actually start recording. So the thought that keeps coming back into my head, and I know I bring this up a lot on this podcast, but it's because it's where my mind goes. I just kind of envision, couldn't you see this? Every time Jesus looked at Judas over their entire time together, he just had compassion in his eyes. Like, can't you just imagine that? Like, every time Jesus looks at Judas, he just looks at him with compassion and love.
Yes.
Knowing full well what this guy is going to do to him. Knowing full well that, you know, even those, because they're all guys, right? They're all together. It
says that he loved him till the last. That's powerful. He loved him till the last.
And I think about that, and I think, okay, you know, and again, this is something that I've brought up on the podcast before. One of those powerful thoughts in my mind is, and while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us.
Right.
And what that means to me is I think about that, and I'm like, yeah, okay, there was literally no one good on the planet.
Right.
No one. Like, the law proved that. No one could keep it. No one was good. Everyone fell short 100%. And yet God still said, you know what? I'm going to go down there and I'm going to fix this.
Right.
And then every time Jesus looks at Judas, I can just imagine there's compassion in his eyes. And yet, how do we look at people who do stuff like this? We look at them
Stupid
and we
train.
eat them. Yeah. We look at them and we...
Yep. This is a problem when we do our podcast super early. I can't wake everyone in the house. I got to be outside.
Yeah, well, what's funny is that train doesn't care that everyone's asleep in your house. They're like, hey.
No, it sure doesn't. We don't sleep well unless there's a train honking its horn.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
We've gotten so used to it.
But you know what I'm trying to say there. It's just we eat our own, and that's exactly the opposite of what God did for us.
Right. Well, you know, it's funny because I think, like I said, like, we're afraid. So we turn like a pack of wolves because we're afraid of the disease spreading to us. Like, that's really what it is. Yeah,
Wow.
That's what I'm saying about the wolves turn on each other, a dog's turn on each other, the sick one. Because psychologically, really deep down, we're afraid that this is going to affect us. It's going to hit and hurt us. Because, you know, it's kind of like everyone at the table with Judas. Like, is it I, Lord? You know, like, everybody has to ask this question. Nobody should be hearing this going, you know, oh, never me. You know, like Peter. Well, we see what happened there, right? Even if all fall away, I never will, Lord, you know. And everybody ought to be asking, like, Lord, is it me? Is it me? That scripture says, you know, if a man thinks he stands, let him take heed lest he fall. and I've read and done enough study on apostasy, and I know we've talked about this, because I think when the Bible needs to comfort you, it comforts you. Kind of like Spurgeon used to say that if you're worried that you've fallen away from God, you haven't. Right? Like he goes, if you've worried you've fallen, come short of his grace, you haven't, because you're worried about it. The person that's blasphemed the Holy Spirit or whatever, beyond forgiveness or whatever, there are passages like that. I think we forget that. Spurgeon would and other great preachers that understand the gospel would go on to say, no, you don't have to worry, because a guy who's done that doesn't worry about it, But at the same time, if you're looking at things like apostasy, there are plenty of scriptures, and I think this is kind of the elephant in the room that scares us, is the fact that it's possible to apostatize. And I have friends that disagree with me on this. Like, I come from a Reformed background, so I used to believe that apostasy was just for spurious converts. And if you don't know what spurious converts means, it means false converts. People that, believe, like Jesus said, and they fall away quickly because of the hardship.
What spurious converts mean? Sorry. Anyway, go on.
So, hey Siri. So, remember we used to, when Siri first came out, and we used to do that on the podcast just to make everybody's Siri freak out.
Yep.
So, there goes your HomePod. But, it's funny because, as, people would say, oh no, like Paul, when he's talking to the Galatians, he says, for I have my doubts concerning you. Like, he's not sure they were ever saved, right? And he says, I marvel that you so quickly turn aside to a different gospel. So were they saved or weren't they saved? Paul doesn't know. And I would say that when it comes to apostasy, it's kind of a mystery. Like, we're warned about it. There seem to be passages that indicate that they're going out from us, shows that they were never really one of us. And people have taken that one verse. Well, John's talking about the people in Ephesus with the Gnostics. So I don't know if that's really an accurate, way to look at that passage that applies to everybody in all time, because the other passages seem to indicate that you could fall away. And so I don't, like for example, like he's got the passage in 1 Timothy that says, fight the good fight, keeping faith and a good conscience, which some have rejected and suffered shipwreck in regard to their faith. I could explain that away, but maybe I shouldn't. When he says, take care, brethren, in Hebrews, that there not be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. That sounds like a passage I shouldn't explain away. I should just let it be what it is. And like I said, people want to define it. Oh, well, that's just spoken to people that, no, it seems to indicate that you were there, but you aren't after. And so, look, I know that's not going to sell books and make people happy, but I think the sheer amount, there's like 20 warnings of apostasy in the New Testament. And, and I just think it's one of those things where I think for our own comfort, we want to explain it away theologically so that we don't have to think about it. The problem is Josh Harris makes us think about it. Do you mean to tell me Josh Harris wasn't saved? Do you mean, like, really? Is it that easy? Is it that easy just to suddenly write this entire man's life off because he said he doesn't think he could call himself a Christian? He's being honest. He's looking at the doctrines, and he's not doing what so many people do, where he's like, hey, I think he's finding himself at odds with Scripture, going, I don't think I'm going to be a Christian because I don't believe that stuff anymore. And I think he's being honest. I wish more people were honest rather than just trying to redefine what Christianity is and call themselves that. I actually respect the fact that Josh has the integrity to look at Scripture, know what it says, and say, by my own definition a few years ago, I can no longer call myself that. Like, that's integrity. And so I'm not speaking, I'm not excusing apostasy, I'm not saying any of that. What I am saying is that I think Josh Harris, the reason it gets that reaction is because we're scared. And we don't know what to do with that. Because by all intents, he appears to be a guy that has the fruit of righteousness and has had the fruit of righteousness for years and has helped many people come to faith. And of course, there's tons of scriptures that say many will come to me in that day. And it's too easy to lump him into that. And I think it does a disservice to him, but I think we do that for us, not for Josh. We do it because it makes us feel better. And maybe it's not that easy. Maybe it's not that simple. That's all I'm saying.
Heavy subject.
Oh my gosh, right? So do you recant that it will only take 5 or 10 minutes? There's so much more.
I should know with you, it'll always take more than 5 or 10 minutes.
That is true, isn't it? That is true.
I would have just said, be cool. Be cool. Everyone just be cool. Done.
Calm down, ding diddly ding diddly.
Yeah.
They did their best, shaddly diddly. Gotta be nice, diddly diddly. You know, that is probably the title for today.
Oh my gosh,
Gotta
could you
be
imagine?
nice, diddly diddly. But yeah, you know what, you guys, at the end of the day, I really do think that, you know, regardless of what anyone else is doing, we do have a duty and a responsibility to love Josh Harris and to not be afraid of it. You know, that if it's genuine apostasy, then we also have a responsibility to treat him accordingly, still with love, still with grace, still with mercy, accepting what he said. But you know what? He could just be going through a hard time and may come back. And gosh, I hate to think that all the people that have just viciously torn into him because he was honest and showed, hey, I don't think I believe in God anymore. Oh, come on. You know, we can do better, church. We can do better.
If Christ hasn't stopped loving him, how are we going to take that road? You know?
Yeah, absolutely, brother. Absolutely. Well, hey, in all this time trying not to apostatize, Pete.
SimpleApostasy.com. Simplify apostasy.
Oh, man. So
I'm so glad he doesn't listen to the podcast.
If you, well, and this is what I said, we're going to have a talk with respect for him, because if I were close to that dude, like, I don't know him. I'll never have access to him. I'm not in his circle. But because of that, maybe I should shut up, you know, trying to figure it out or put a judgment. I hope in no way today that we've put a judgment. My hope is for the best. It's kind of like Paul says, right? When he says to is it the Romans or the Galatians? I can't remember what he says. Maybe it's Hebrews, but he says, but we hope better things concerning you. He lays down, I can't remember what passage that is, but he says, but we trust better things concerning you. That's my hope, is that this is not final for him. And that being the case, you know, it's kind of like when you have a falling out with your spouse. You know, if you treated every argument like divorce, you wouldn't have a marriage very long. And I would just say, guys, just play it cool. You know, just play it cool right now. Like, he shared something. It could be a cry for help. It could be that he just wants everybody's eyes off of him and doesn't want to be the poster boy anymore for all these different things. And just, it's freedom for him to just, you know, but I'll guarantee you there's more. There's more to the story. And, you know, if I were close to him, I just hope I could be a guy that says, hey, let's go out to coffee. I'm not going to try to talk you back in. Like, you can never talk to someone, but let's talk. Let's at least keep this dialogue open. I'm going to be pulling for you, brother. I want you to be as honest as you possibly need to be. I want you to share everything. Don't hold back anything, man. And I will tell you this, no matter what you're feeling, what you're going through, God can take it. He can take whatever, and he loves you dearly. And you can even tell him, I don't believe in you. But keep talking to him. And, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, that's the best we can do. We can't control what other people think, feel, or believe, but we can be there for them. And I would love to think that, you know, one of these days when something like this happens, the church just says, you know what, it hurts, because you definitely know that the apostles were hurt by Judas, but that ended in death. That was the sin leading to death. But at the end of the day, I'm hoping that he does have people around him that'll gather. So anyways, all that to say, Pete. So so with all that resisting apostasy, Pete, How does one get their IRS compliance and finances and bookkeeping done?
You know, I'm actually really grateful that you asked, Peyton, because who I use is resistapostasy.com, which is also simplifychurch.com.
You know, it's good to know that they have an alias and another website. If you go to resistapostasy.com, you'll be taken straight to simplifychurch.com. And then they'll help you with all your bookkeeping and IRS compliance and even payroll service. They even have a VA system. If you need a VA assistant, they will help you with all of that. And he may also help you resist apostasy. And I know we're going to get hate mail. Hey, you guys, don't be joking about that. Okay, we're done.
And it goes to Pete@churchplannermag.com. And if it's your first time emailing me, just know it goes straight to the trash.
Well, guys, thanks for joining us today on the Church Planner Podcast. This has been Peyton Jones and Pete Mitchell, reminding you if you want to reach the ones no one's reaching, you need to go where nobody's going and do what nobody's doing.
What?
Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planner Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planner Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplannerpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planner Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplannermagazine.com.